Captain Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the New Horizons. Through the big windows, he could see a blue and green planet getting bigger as they flew closer. This was Kepler 442b, home to the Zephyrians. Jake had been flying spaceships for 20 years, but he had never met aliens quite like these ones. "Captain, we're getting a message from the planet," said Lieutenant Kate Phillips from her seat at the communications desk. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls as strange. Sounds filled the bridge. "Put it through the translator," Jake said. He straightened his uniform and tried to look calm, even though his heart was beating fast. A voice came through the speakers, speaking perfect English now. "Human vessel, you may approach our main city. Follow the path we are sending to your computers. Do not go anywhere else." Jake nodded to his pilot, who began following the route that appeared on their screens. The Zephyrians were known across the galaxy for being very smart. Some said they were the smartest beings anyone had ever found. They had technology that could control energy in amazing ways. That's why the humans were here. Ambassador Lisa Carter walked onto the bridge. She was a tall woman with gray hair who had been talking to aliens for most of her life. She looked worried, which made Jake feel worried too. "How are you feeling about this, Lisa?" Jake asked. Lisa shook her head. "I've read everything we have about the Zephyrians. They think they're better than everyone else because they're so smart. They won't want to trade with us unless we can prove we're worth their time." Dr. Alex Morgan looked up from his tablet where he had been reading about Zephyrian culture. "Their whole society is based on how smart you are," he said. "The smartest ones are the leaders. They think that being smart makes you more important than other people." Jake frowned. "That doesn't sound very fair." "It's not about being fair to them," Lisa said. "It's about being logical. They believe that the smartest beings should make the decisions for everyone else." The ship shook slightly as they entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the windows, they could see huge cities with tall, twisted buildings that seemed to bend and flow like water. Flying vehicles moved between the buildings in perfect patterns, never bumping into each other. "Look at that," whispered Tom Baker, the chief engineer. "Their whole city runs like a perfect machine." As they got closer to the landing area, Jake could see crowds of Zephyrians waiting for them. The aliens were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large heads. Their eyes were bigger than human eyes, and they seemed to glow with a soft light. "Remember," Lisa said to everyone on the bridge, "be polite, but don't act like we're not as good as they are. We're here to make a deal, not to bow down to them." The ship landed with a soft bump. Jake, Lisa, Alex, and Tom walked to the exit door. Kate and the others would stay on the ship to keep it safe and ready to leave quickly if needed. Outside, the air smelled like flowers and electricity. The Zephyrians had built a platform for the humans to walk on. At the end of the platform stood one Zephyrian who was clearly important. She wore long, flowing clothes that changed colors as she moved. "I am High Counselor Vex Thara, the alien," said as the humans approached. Her voice was musical, but cold. "You are the humans who wish to trade with us." Lisa stepped forward. "I am Ambassador Lisa Carter. We're honored to meet you, High Counselor. We hope we can work together for the good of both our peoples." Vex Thara's large eyes looked at each human for a long moment. Jake felt like she was studying them the way a scientist might study insects. "We have heard about humans," she said. "You are very young as a space-traveling species. You have only been flying between stars for a short time." "That's true," Lisa said, "but we learn quickly. We think we have things that might interest you, and we know you have technology that could help us. What could you possibly have that we would want?" Vex Thara asked. The question sounded like an insult, but her voice stayed calm and polite. Alex stepped forward. We have different ways of thinking about problems. Sometimes a fresh view can help solve old puzzles. Several Zephyrians behind Vexthara made sounds that the translator said meant laughter, but not the kind of laughter. It was the kind that meant they thought something was funny in a mean way. Different ways of thinking, Vexthara repeated. You mean less advanced ways of thinking. We have been solving complex problems for thousands of years, while your species was still learning to make fire. Jake felt his face get hot. He wanted to say something back, but Lisa put her hand on his arm to stop him. We understand you have much more experience than we do, Lisa said carefully. But sometimes new ideas can be valuable, even if they come from someone with less experience. Vexthara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Very well. We shall see if your new ideas have any value at all. But we will not waste time with long talks and boring meetings. If you truly believe humans have something to offer, then prove it. How? Lisa asked. There is an ancient game we play called Nexus Cognitus. It tests all forms of intelligence, logic, creativity, wisdom, strategy. I am considered the best player on our world. If one of you can defeat me in this game, we will consider serious trade talks with your species. The humans looked at each other. None of them had ever heard of this game. And if we lose? Jake asked. Vexthara's expression didn't change. Then you will leave our space and never return. We will tell all other civilizations that humans are not worth talking to. Your species will be marked as intellectually inferior and unworthy of galactic society. The words hit Jake like a punch in the stomach. This wasn't just about trade anymore. This was about humanity's entire future among the stars. When would this game take place? Lisa asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Tomorrow, in our grand amphitheater, thousands will watch. The game will be broadcast across our world so all can see. Vexthara looked at each human again. Choose your player wisely. You will only get one chance. As the Zephyrians walked away, the humans stood alone on the platform. The weight of what had just happened was sinking in. One game would decide whether humanity would be welcomed into galactic civilization or rejected forever. Well, Tom said quietly, that didn't go like we planned. Jake looked up at the alien city around them. Somewhere in those twisted buildings, thousands of the galaxy's smartest beings were probably already laughing about the humans who thought they could win a game of wits against Vexthara. But Jake had learned something important in his years as a captain. Sometimes the biggest challenges came with the biggest opportunities. They just had to figure out how to turn this impossible situation into their advantage. The question was, which one of them would be brave enough to face the smartest alien on the planet in a game they had never played before? Back on the New Horizons, the human team sat around the meeting table in shocked silence. The weight of Vexthara's challenge hung over them like a dark cloud. One game would decide humanity's fate among the stars. So, Jake said finally, who knows anything about games? Tom raised his hand halfway. I play chess sometimes, but I'm not very good at it. This isn't going to be like chess, Alex said, reading from his tablet. I found some information about Nexus Cognitus in our cultural files. It's much more complex. The game tests 7 different types of thinking: logic, math, creativity, history, prediction, ethics, and something called adaptive thinking. Lisa rubbed her forehead. None of us are experts in Zephyrian culture or philosophy. How can we possibly win against their best player? Maybe that's not the right question, said a voice from the doorway. Commander Rick Davis walked into the room. He was the ship's tactical officer, a man who had spent years in the military before joining the space service. Maybe the question is, what do we have that they don't expect? Jake looked at Rick with interest. What do you mean? Rick sat down at the table. I've been thinking about what that alien said. She expects us to lose because we're not as smart. As they are. But what if being smart in their way isn't the only way to win? You want to volunteer for this? Lisa asked. Rick, this isn't a battle. It's a game of pure intelligence. Is it, though? Rick leaned forward. Alex, you said the game tests 7 types of thinking. What exactly are they? Alex looked at his notes. Spatial reasoning, ethical philosophy, mathematical optimization, creative problem solving, historical analysis, predictive modeling, and adaptive thinking. I know about some of those things, Rick said. Spatial reasoning. That's like understanding how things move in 3 dimensions. I do that all the time in tactical planning. Predictive modeling. That's figuring out what the enemy will do next. Creative problem solving. That's what you do when your original plan doesn't work, and you have to improvise. Tom nodded slowly. You know, Rick has a point. When we were fighting those pirates near Jupiter last year, he came up with a strategy that nobody expected. He used our garbage disposal system as a weapon. That was different, Rick said with a small smile. But the point is the same. Sometimes the best solution isn't the obvious one. Kate's voice came through the communication system. Captain, I've been listening to Zephyrian broadcasts about tomorrow's game. They're all talking about how easy it will be for Vexthara to win. Some of them are betting on how quickly she finishes us off. What's the fastest anyone has ever lost? Jake asked. According to what I'm hearing, the record is 12 minutes, Kate replied. Most games last several hours, but 12 minutes is the shortest time anyone has ever lasted against Vexthara. Rick stood up. Then I guess I need to last at least 13 minutes. Rick, this is serious, Lisa said. If you lose, it's not just your reputation on the line. It's all of humanity. I know, Rick said quietly. But look at our options. Alex is smart, but he's a scientist, not a game player. Tom is great with machines, but this isn't about fixing engines. Lisa, you're good with people, but the Zephyrians have already made up their minds about us. Jake, you're a good captain, but you've got to stay ready to get us out of here if things go wrong. Jake realized Rick was right. None of them were perfect for this challenge, but Rick might be there. Best chance. What's your plan? I don't have one yet, Rick admitted, but I will by tomorrow. Kate, can you record everything about this game? Every rule, every strategy you can find. I'm already working on it, Kate's voice replied. But Rick, there's something you should know. Nexus Cognitus isn't just about being smart. It's about being smart in the Zephyrian way. Their whole culture is built around logical thinking and following rules perfectly. That might actually help. U.S., Rick said. If they always think the same way, then maybe they won't see a different kind of thinking coming. The next morning came too quickly. The grand amphitheater was huge, with thousands of seats rising up in circles around a central stage. Every seat was filled with Zephyrians, all there to watch their champion destroy the human challenger. Rick walked onto the stage wearing his best uniform. His hands were steady, but Jake could see the tension in his shoulders. Across from him, Vexthara glided onto the stage like she was floating. She looked calm and confident, like someone who had never lost at anything in her life. Beings of Zephyr Prime, Vexthara announced, her voice carrying easily through the huge space. Today we will demonstrate the difference between advanced and primitive thinking. This human believes his species can offer us something of value. We shall see if he can last even 15 minutes against true intelligence. The crowd made those laughing sounds again. Rick didn't seem to notice. He was studying the game board that had appeared between them. It looked like a 3-dimensional puzzle made of light, with shapes that moved and changed as he watched. The rules are simple, Vexthara said to Rick. 7 phases, each testing a different aspect of intelligence. You must not only make the Correct moves, but also explain your reasoning. Logic and creativity, wisdom and strategy, all must work together. Do you understand? I think so, Rick said, but I have one question. Are we playing to win, or are we playing to not lose? Vex Thara paused. It was clearly not a question she had expected. What do you mean? Well, if we're playing to win, then I need to beat you. But if we're playing to not lose, then I just need to not be completely defeated. Those are two different games with two different strategies. The alien looked confused. For a moment, we are playing Nexus Cognitus. The goal is to demonstrate superior intelligence. Got it, Rick said. Just wanted to be clear. From the viewing area where the other humans sat, Alex whispered to Jake, "What is he doing?" "I think he's trying to figure out the real rules," Jake whispered back. "Not just the game rules, but the social rules." The first phase began. It was spatial reasoning, moving complex shapes through a three-dimensional maze. Vex Thara's moves were elegant and perfect, each one clearly the result of careful calculation. Rick's moves were different. He seemed to be feeling his way through the puzzle, trying things and adjusting when they didn't work. "Explain your reasoning," Vex Thara demanded after Rick made what looked like a mistake. "I'm testing the boundaries," Rick said. "Sometimes you have to poke at a problem to understand how it really works." Vex Thara won the first phase easily, but Rick lasted longer than she had expected. The crowd grew restless. This was supposed to be over quickly. The second phase was ethical philosophy. Rick had to solve moral puzzles and explain his thinking. Again, Vex Thara's answers were perfect by Zephyrian standards. Rick's answers were different. "In this scenario," Vex Thara said, "logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." "Maybe," Rick said, "but what? If the few have information that could save everyone? What if sacrificing them means you lose the solution to the whole problem?" Vex Thara frowned. "That is not the question being asked." "Isn't it, though?" Rick asked. "I mean, the question assumes we know everything about the situation. But in real life, we never know everything. We have to make decisions based on incomplete information." For the first time, Vex Thara looked uncertain. Rick's answer wasn't wrong, exactly, but it wasn't the kind of answer the game was designed for. The third phase was mathematical optimization. Here, Vex Thara clearly expected to crush the human completely. Mathematics was pure logic after all. There was only one right answer, but Rick surprised her again. Instead of trying to find the perfect mathematical solution, he found a solution that was good enough, and found it much faster than Vex Thara expected. "Your answer is not optimal," Vex Thara pointed out. "No," Rick agreed, "but it works, and I finished it in half the time. Sometimes good enough right now is better than perfect too late." The crowd was getting quieter. This wasn't going the way they had expected. The human wasn't winning, but he wasn't losing the way he was supposed to either. As they moved into the fourth phase, creative problem solving, Rick began to smile. This was where things were about to get interesting. The fourth phase began with a problem that looked impossible. A complex three-dimensional maze appeared in the light display, but this maze was different from the first one. Parts of it moved and changed every few seconds. Some paths appeared and disappeared. Others split into multiple routes that seemed to lead nowhere. "The challenge," Vex Thara explained, "is to find a path from start to finish while the maze continues to change. You must adapt your strategy as new information becomes available." Vex Thara began immediately, her long fingers moving gracefully over the control surface. She tracked multiple possible paths, calculating probabilities and mapping the mazes. Pattern of changes. Her approach was methodical and precise, like watching a master mathematician solve a complex equation. Rick watched her for a few moments. then did something unexpected. Instead of trying to map the entire maze, he started, moving his piece forward along the first path he could see. "You haven't calculated the optimal route," Vexthara said, looking puzzled. "Nope," Rick replied, making another move. "But I'm already moving while you're still planning." The crowd murmured in confusion. This wasn't how the game was supposed to be played. You were supposed to think first, then act. The human was doing everything backwards, but something strange began to happen. While Vexthara calculated the perfect path through the maze's current configuration, the maze changed again. Her careful calculations became useless, and she had to start over. Meanwhile, Rick kept moving, adjusting his path each time the maze shifted. "This is not logical," Vexthara said, her voice showing frustration for the first time. "Maybe not," Rick said, navigating around a barrier that had just appeared, "but it's working." From the viewing area, Tom whispered to the other humans, "He's treating it like a combat situation. Move fast, adapt as you go, don't get stuck planning when the situation is changing too quickly." Alex nodded. "Vexthara is trying to solve the maze like it's a math problem with one correct answer. But Rick is treating it like flying through an asteroid field. You can't calculate every asteroid's position. You have to react and adjust." Rick reached the maze's exit first. The crowd fell completely silent. Vexthara stared at the display in disbelief. "How did you do that? Your method was completely inefficient." "Was it?" Rick asked. "I got there first." "But you didn't find the optimal path." "I found the path that worked," Rick said simply. "Sometimes that's more important than finding the perfect path." The fifth phase was historical analysis. Here, surely, the human would fail. Zephyrian history went back thousands of years, full of complex philosophical developments and logical progressions. How could a human whose species had barely left their home planet compete in this area? The challenge involved analyzing the rise and fall of three ancient civilizations and predicting what would have happened if certain key events had been different. Vexthara began with a detailed recitation of historical facts, dates, and the logical chains of cause and effect that had shaped each civilization. Rick listened carefully, then gave his own analysis. But instead of focusing on the specific details of Zephyrian history, he talked about patterns he had seen in human history. He spoke about how civilizations often fell, not because of external enemies, but because they became too rigid in their thinking. He discussed how societies that encouraged different viewpoints tended to survive longer than those that demanded everyone think the same way. "These are not Zephyrian civilizations you are describing," Vexthara pointed out. "I know," Rick said, "but people are people, whether they're human or Zephyrian or anything else. We all face similar challenges. How to organize society, how to distribute resources, how to handle conflict. The specific details might be different, but the underlying patterns are often the same." Several younger Zephyrians in the crowd leaned forward with interest. This was a perspective they had never considered before. The idea that alien civilizations might face similar problems and find similar solutions was both obvious and revolutionary. Vexthara won the phase on technical knowledge, but Rick's answers had made the crowd think in ways they never had before. Some of the older Zephyrians looked uncomfortable, while others seemed intrigued by these new ideas. The sixth phase was predictive modeling, trying to guess what would happen next in various scenarios. This was where Rick's military background really showed. He had spent years trying to predict what enemies would do, learning to read patterns of behavior and anticipate reactions. The test involved predicting the outcomes of complex political and social situations. Vexthara approached each scenario logically, using game theory and statistical analysis to determine the most probable outcomes. Rick used a different method. He tried to put himself in the position of each person involved in the scenarios. What would motivate them? What were they afraid of? What did they want most? Instead of treating people like logical machines, he treated them like ... well, like people. In this scenario, Vexthara said, the logical choice for the leader is to form an alliance with the stronger faction. Maybe, Rick said, but what? If the leader doesn't trust the stronger faction? What if he's more afraid of being betrayed than he is of losing? People don't always make the logical choice. Sometimes they make the emotional choice, or the choice that feels safer, even if it's not optimal. Rick's predictions were less mathematically precise than Vexthara's, but they turned out to be more accurate when the test scenarios played out. He had understood something that the Zephyrian approach missed, the unpredictable, human element that influenced every decision. The crowd was no longer laughing. Many of them were watching Rick with fascination rather than contempt. This human wasn't more intelligent than Vexthara in the traditional sense, but he was seeing things she missed. Kate's voice came through Rick's earpiece, so quietly that only he could hear it. Rick, you're doing something impossible. You're actually keeping up with her. The crowd is starting to think you might have a chance. From her position near the viewing area, Amy Foster, the ship's nurse, watched the Zephyrian. Faces around her. She had spent years learning to read people, and what she saw surprised her. The younger Zephyrians looked excited, like students who had just discovered a new subject they wanted to learn about. Some of the older ones looked worried, as if their fundamental beliefs about the universe were being challenged as they prepared. For the seventh and final phase, Vexthara looked at Rick with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You are not what I expected," she said quietly. "Neither are you," Rick replied. "You're much smarter than anyone I've ever met. But maybe being smart isn't just about knowing the right answers. Maybe it's also about asking the right questions." Vexthara was quiet for a long moment. "The final phase is adaptive thinking," she said at last. "The ultimate test of intelligence. Are you ready?" Rick looked up at the thousands of Zephyrians watching him, and at his fellow humans in the viewing area. Jake gave him a small nod of encouragement. Tom flashed him a thumbs up. Lisa looked terrified but hopeful. "I'm ready," Rick said, but as the final phase began, he realized that everything that had come before was just preparation. This was where the real game would be won or lost. And despite everything he had accomplished so far, he was about to face a challenge unlike anything he had ever encountered. The survival of humanity's place in the galaxy would depend on his ability to think in ways that no one, not even he himself, had ever imagined before. The seventh phase began differently from all the others. Instead of a clear challenge appearing on the display, the game board went completely blank. Then, slowly, a simple message appeared. "Create your own challenge." Rick stared at the empty display, confused. "I don't understand. What am I supposed to do?" Vexthara smiled for the first time since the game began, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "This is adaptive thinking at its purest form. You must create a challenge that demonstrates your intelligence, then solve it. But there is a catch. I must also be able to solve your challenge, and I will create one for you as well. We must solve each other's puzzles." The crowd leaned forward with excitement. This was the part of Nexus Cognitus they loved most. It was where Vexthara usually destroyed her opponents completely. How could anyone create a challenge that the smartest Zephyrian couldn't solve? "I see," Rick said slowly. "So we're not just solving problems anymore. We're creating them too." "Exactly. You have 30 minutes to create your challenge, then 30 minutes to solve mine. The quality of both your creation and your solution will be judged." Rick looked at the blank display and tried to think. What kind of challenge could he create that would test intelligence but also play to his strengths rather than Vexthara's? He thought about everything he had learned about Zephyrian culture over the past 2 days. The Zephyrians valued logic. Above all else, they liked problems with clear rules and definite answers. They believed that intelligence meant finding the one perfect solution to any problem. But what if he created a problem where there was no perfect solution? What if he made a challenge where being logical actually made things harder? An idea began to form in Rick's mind. It was risky, maybe even crazy, but it might be the only way to beat an opponent who was clearly smarter than he was. Rick began working on his challenge. On the display, he created what looked like a simple resource management problem. There was a colony on a distant planet facing multiple crises at once: food shortage, equipment failures, and approaching bad weather. The challenge was to allocate limited resources to solve these problems. But Rick added elements that made the problem more complex than it appeared. Every solution created new problems. Fixing one crisis made others worse. There was no way to solve everything perfectly, and the longer you spent trying to find the perfect solution, the worse the overall situation became. Interesting, Vexthara said as she studied Rick's challenge. A multivariable optimization problem with cascading consequences. Difficult, but solvable with proper analysis. While she worked on his challenge, Rick watched Vexthara create her own puzzle for him. It appeared on his display as an incredibly complex logical maze. Not a physical maze like before, but a maze of ideas and concepts. To solve it, he would need to follow chains of logical reasoning through dozens of interconnected philosophical problems. Rick looked at Vexthara's challenge and felt his heart sink. It was beautiful in its complexity, like a work of art made from pure thought. There was no way his simple human mind could navigate through something so sophisticated. But then he remembered something Tom had said earlier. Sometimes good enough right now is better than perfect too late. Instead of trying to understand every part of Vexthara's logical maze, Rick started moving through it quickly, making decisions based on instinct rather than careful analysis. When he came to a philosophical problem he didn't understand, he gave the answer that felt right to him rather than the answer he thought was logically correct. Meanwhile, Vexthara was working on Rick's resource management problem with growing frustration. She kept finding solutions that seemed perfect until she implemented them and discovered they created worse problems elsewhere. She would start over, calculate more carefully, find a better solution, only to have the same thing happen again. "This is illogical," she muttered, her calm composure finally cracking. "There should be an optimal solution." "Maybe there isn't one," Rick said without looking up from his own puzzle. "Maybe sometimes you just have to accept that you can't fix everything and focus on making the best bad situation you can." Vexthara stopped working and stared at him. That is not how problems are solved." "It's how I solve them," Rick said. He was making steady progress through her logical maze, not by being smarter than her, but by not trying to be as smart as her. In the military, we called it satisficing, finding a solution that's good enough to work, even if it's not perfect. The crowd was getting restless. This wasn't how the seventh phase usually went. Normally, both players would work in focused silence, creating elegant solutions to beautiful problems. This looked more like chaos. Rick finished Vexthara's maze first, not because he had solved it perfectly, but because he had found a path through it that worked. His solution wasn't elegant or sophisticated, but it got him from the beginning to the end. Vexthara was still struggling with Rick's resource problem. She had found 17 different approaches, and every single one failed when she tried to implement it. The colony in the simulation kept getting worse, no matter what she did. "Time," announced the game's computer system. Vexthara looked up, in shock. She had never failed to solve a challenge before. "Not ever. I need more time. This problem has a solution. I just need to calculate longer." "But that's the point," Rick said gently. In real life, you don't get more time. People are starving right now. Equipment is breaking right now. The storm is coming whether you found the perfect solution or not. Sometimes you have to make the best decision you can with the information you have and the time you've got. The crowd was completely silent now. They were watching something they had never seen before. Their greatest champion, the smartest person on their planet, being beaten at a game of intelligence by an alien they had considered primitive. But it was more than just losing a game. Rick had shown them a completely different way of thinking about problems. Instead of seeking perfection, he sought effectiveness. Instead of trying to control everything, he accepted that some things couldn't be controlled and worked around them. I don't understand, Vexthara said quietly. Your solution to my challenge is crude. It ignores dozens of logical considerations. But it works, Rick pointed out. My approach to your challenge is logically sound. It should produce better results. If you had unlimited time and perfect information, maybe, Rick said. But you don't. Nobody does. Sometimes the best solution is the one you can actually implement, not the one that looks best on paper. Vexthara stared at the displays showing both challenges. Rick had found a working solution to her elegant logical maze, while she had failed to solve his messy real-world problem. According to the rules of Nexus Cognitus, the human had won, but it was more than that. Rick had won by changing the rules of the game itself. He hadn't tried to be smarter than Vexthara. Instead, he had shown her a type of intelligence she had never encountered before. I concede, Vexthara said, her voice barely above a whisper. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some Zephyrians cheered, others argued, and many simply sat in stunned silence. Their entire understanding of intelligence and superiority had just been challenged by a human who freely admitted he wasn't as smart as they were. Rick looked around. The amphitheater had thousands of alien faces, showing every emotion, from amazement to confusion to excitement. He had won, but he wasn't sure what exactly he had won. All he knew was that humanity's future among the stars had just changed forever, and he had no idea what would happen next. The grand amphitheater remained in chaos for nearly an hour after Rick's victory. Thousands of Zephyrians argued among themselves, their voices creating a sound like rushing water. Some demanded that the game be declared invalid. Others insisted that the human had somehow cheated. But many more seemed fascinated by what they had witnessed. Vexthara sat motionless on the stage, staring at the game displays that still showed Rick's solutions. Jake could see that something fundamental had changed in the alien leader's thinking. She looked like someone who had just discovered that everything she believed about the universe might be wrong. High Counselor, one of the younger Zephyrians, called from the crowd, "What does this mean? How could the human solve problems that our greatest mind could not?" Vexthara was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried throughout the amphitheater. "It means," she said slowly, "that intelligence may be more complex than we understood." She stood and walked over to Rick, who was still sitting at his position, looking somewhat dazed by his own victory. "Commander Davis," she said formally, "according to the ancient laws of Nexus Cognitus, you have won. Your species has proven its worth." The crowd grew quieter, waiting to hear what would happen next. "But more than that," Vexthara continued, "you have shown us something we did not know existed. You have demonstrated a form of intelligence that operates by different rules than ours. We have studied logic and mathematics and philosophy for thousands of years, but we never considered that there might be other valid ways of thinking." Rick stood up, still not quite believing what had happened. "High Counselor, I want you to know I'm not smarter than you. Not even close. You know things I could never learn, and you can solve problems I could never understand. Then how did you defeat me?" Rick thought about it for a moment. I think it's because we're playing different games. You're trying to find the perfect answer. I'm just trying to find an answer that works. You're solving the problem. I'm solving the situation. Vexthara nodded slowly. Yes, I begin to see. We have always believed that there was one correct way to approach any problem, the logical way. But you have shown us that there might be many correct ways, depending on circumstances. Over the next few days, everything changed very quickly. The Zephyrian Council met in emergency sessions to discuss what Rick's victory meant for their society. News of the game spread across the galaxy, and other alien civilizations began asking questions about these humans who had defeated the smartest beings anyone knew. Ambassador Lisa found herself in the strange position of negotiating from strength instead of weakness. Not only did the Zephyrians want to trade their energy technology for human goods, they also wanted something much more valuable. They wanted to learn how humans thought. We wish to establish an exchange program, Vexthara explained during one of their meetings. We will send some of our young people to learn from your species, and we hope you will allow some of your people to study with us. What exactly would they be studying? Lisa asked. We want to understand how you solve problems without following logical frameworks, how you make decisions with incomplete information, how you adapt when your original plans fail. Vexthara paused. We want to learn how to think like humans. Dr. Alex was fascinated by the cultural changes he was witnessing on Zephyr Prime. Young Zephyrians were questioning ideas that had never been questioned before. Universities were starting to teach classes on alternative thinking methods. Some of the older Zephyrians were uncomfortable with these changes, but many seemed excited by new possibilities. It's like watching a scientific revolution, Alex told Jake. For thousands of years, they've had one way of understanding intelligence. Now they're discovering there might be other ways. The most surprising change was in Vexthara herself. The alien leader who had once seemed so cold and superior now spent hours talking with Rick about human problem-solving methods. She was especially interested in how humans handled uncertainty and incomplete information. On Zephyr Prime, she explained, we have always believed that the best decision is the one based on complete analysis of all available data. But you make good decisions even when you don't have all the information. How is this possible? Rick thought about it. I guess we're used to not knowing everything. On Earth, we've always had to make decisions based on what we could figure out, not what we wished we knew. Maybe that taught us to be comfortable with uncertainty. Comfortable with uncertainty, Vexthara repeated. We have a word for that in our language, but it is considered a negative trait. Perhaps we need to reconsider. Captain Jake received messages from other alien civilizations throughout the galaxy. Species that had never shown interest in humans before were now requesting diplomatic contact. The victory at Nexus Cognitus had changed humanity's reputation from primitive newcomers to beings with unique capabilities. But the most important change was something none of them had expected. 3 Zephyrian research ships requested permission to accompany the New Horizons when it left the planet. They wanted to visit Earth and study human civilization firsthand. This is unprecedented, Vexthara admitted. We have never sent research missions to study other cultures. We always believed our own culture was superior to all others. But now we realize that different cultures might have different strengths. On the day the New Horizons prepared to leave, thousands of Zephyrians gathered to watch the departure. The mood was completely different from when the humans had arrived. Instead of cold politeness, there was genuine excitement and curiosity. Rick stood on the bridge watching the 3 Zephyrian ships take formation alongside the New Horizons. It still felt unreal. A week ago, he had been just another ship's officer. Now he was famous across the galaxy as the human who had beaten Vexthara at her own game. How do you feel about all this? Jake asked him. Rick shrugged. Honestly, I'm not sure what we've started here. These Zephyrians are incredibly smart. If they learn to think the way we do, and we learn to think the way they do, who knows what we might accomplish together? Tom looked up from his engineering station. I heard from the Zephyrian engineers that they want to combine their energy technology with our adaptive problem-solving approaches. They think they might be able to create faster-than-light drives that are 10 times more efficient than anything that exists now. And that's just the beginning, Lisa added. Other alien species are asking if they can send observers to study both human and Zephyrian thinking methods. We might have accidentally started some kind of galactic renaissance of problem-solving. As the New Horizons and its escort ships prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed, Rick thought about how strange life could be. He had volunteered for what seemed like an impossible challenge, expecting to lose quickly and hoping to at least avoid embarrassing humanity too badly. Instead, he had won a game he didn't understand, using methods he couldn't fully explain, and somehow changed the course of galactic civilization in the process. "Navigation ready," reported the pilot. "All ships report ready for jump," Kate announced. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew, his friends, who had somehow managed to turn humanity's greatest diplomatic crisis into its greatest opportunity. "Take us home," he said. As the ships jumped into faster-than-light travel, Rick realized that they weren't just returning to Earth with new technology and new allies. They were bringing back something much more valuable, proof that there were many ways to be intelligent, many ways to solve problems, and many ways to understand the universe. The game of wits was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, not by being the smartest species in the galaxy, but by showing that intelligence itself was more diverse and wonderful than anyone had imagined. And in the end, that turned out to be the most human victory of all.